Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 205. What's it like to learn Python as a visually impaired or blind developer? How can you improve the accessibility of your Python web applications and learn current guidelines? This week on the show, Real Python community member Audrey van Breederode discusses her programming journey, web accessibility, and assistive technology. Audrey shares her background as a system administrator and instructor. While learning Python, she discovered our website, Real Python. Audrey provided some feedback about the built-in video player's accessibility, and Dan reached out and worked with Audrey on some website improvements for the visually impaired. We discuss navigating modern websites and using assistive technology. Audrey also provides resources Python developers can use to improve the accessibility of their applications. All right, let's get started.
The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com.
Hey, Audrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christopher. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you about assistive technology and learning Python and how developers can learn how to use this stuff a little bit better and add some resources. Those who are listening probably noticed that we had a little bit of a interesting intro there. What you heard is the voice of the JAWS reader, which we'll talk a lot about as we kind of move along today, reading my intro text for me. So thanks for generating that for me, Audrey.
Yeah, you're welcome. To be honest, I had to slow it down to about half the speed that I normally listen to. But I'm used to it and I can listen at very high speeds. But
Yeah.
for other people, I think this is probably challenging enough already.
Yeah, you gave me quite the tour of your setup, and we did a Zoom meeting to discuss what we were going to talk about, and that was a way for you to sort of demonstrate what it's like to navigate a system with that. Maybe this is something we can discuss later, or maybe you can send me a link. I was hoping to maybe find a good video that we could share that somebody could kind of see someone using it. I think the JAWS people have a couple intro videos that have a little bit of that stuff, but it is interesting to watch on things you don't think about as far as navigating using a tool like that.
Yeah, you sure. And we'll see if you can find something nice. But
yeah,
good.
I guess what we might start with, I don't usually do lots of background intro things, but I think in this case, it really makes sense because you kind of have come to Python a little later in life after having a career and then sort of this big change in your life as far as your vision goes. And so would you mind sharing a little bit about your background, not only as far as technologically and your career, but also the change that happened to you a few years ago?
Yeah, sure. Happy to explain a little bit about my background. I was born in the early 60s, and in the 80s I had an electronics education. And in the last year we did some digital electronics, and we started to play with some computers. And suddenly I realized, wow, this is what I want to be. I never understood electronics that well, but digital computers, that made me kicking. So I worked for 5 years for a field service organization servicing Digital Equipment Corporation, PDP 11s.
Okay.
All the old people know what I'm talking about. And then in 1993, I joined Oracle Corporation as a Unix system admin because I learned about the Unix operating system and I've been using it ever since. And after 5 years doing lots of interesting Unix system administration and a little bit of programming in shell scripting and Perl, I wanted to learn more about our own products. So I became an instructor.
Yeah.
To be more specific, I delivered operating system courses for Oracle as well as database administration. And early 2000s, I lost my sight. And I was born nearsighted, and I had lots of retina detachments.
Yeah.
And if it detaches enough, then uh, it stops functioning. So I lost one eye, well, maybe 25 years ago, and 20 years ago, or slightly more, uh, the other eye did the same thing, and then I had no sight so whatsoever. So I had to relearn everything from scratch.
Yeah.
And I started using a screen reader, and the dominant screen reader at the time was JAWS, which is an acronym for Job Access with Speech. And so I had to learn that. And a screen reader is basically grabbing the info from the screen and sends it to a Braille display so you can read with your fingers. So I had to learn Braille. And also to the speech synthesizer. And the speech synthesizer is the one that did your intro for today's episode.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, you listen at a very low speed rate. And then after a week, you talk a bit faster and faster. And you get used to it. And you have to learn a lot of keystrokes. And of course, I was still teaching and had to reinvent everything because you can't easily draw things on the whiteboard anymore. And
Yeah.
but it never became a problem. And as long as you know your stuff and you are able to explain the technology and help people, they're okay with it. So that was nice.
Yeah.
And
Did you
after
have some
20,
assistance with that? Like as far as creating maybe like slide decks and things like that?
now PowerPoint was quite accessible.
Okay.
And by accessible means that you can drive the application with your eyes closed with the screen reader.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't a big problem. I did lots of curriculum development work and course reviews. And the funny thing is that because I had to listen to the information in the courseware, I found lots and lots of typos.
Yeah. I bet.
Yeah, listening to a word that is, and then it will mispronounce it.
Yeah.
What was that? And then you check it and, the spelling is wrong. And so there was a nice benefit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can still teach. That's no problem at all.
I think it's funny because I would imagine the same thing happens with like, repeated words. It's very easy to type those and, but you hear it, it's like, wow, okay, I gotta fix that.
Yeah. And if you write Python and you swap the H and the T, your brain still reads Python,
Yeah.
but the speech synthesizer says, Python. And then you said, what was that?
Yeah.
And
What is that word?
yeah, because it doesn't know how to pronounce it. So that really helps. And after 20 years of teaching, I went to another role, and I'm now again a database and system administration for an internal development team. So that is basically my career so far, and I'm now in my early 60s. So hopefully in a couple of more years, it's time for me to retire.
I was wondering about the settings that you use for JAWS, maybe just generally. Are you using that in English or are you using it in like your native language?
No, man. Well, we didn't mention it, but I'm from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So my native language is Dutch. But working for an American company, I do everything in English.
Okay.
So I'm using a Windows laptop, and everything is in English.
Okay.
And my speech synthesizer is in English. And if I have to read something in Dutch, I switch my speech synthesizer to a Dutch one. And then I can do my stuff in Dutch. But I think 95% of my communication is in English.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that was another potential barrier for technology sometimes. But you found a way around it. And generally, like most programming seems to have centered around English. I don't know if that's, a purposeful thing or it's just kind of what's resulted.
Yeah, I grew up with, and of course, the keywords in Python are all English, and it would be very confusing if you would write them in your own language because you wouldn't be able to read somebody else's code. So somehow the standard is English, and well, that's fine for me. And what makes it difficult if you write something in English, but you put your comments in Dutch, because then every time you have to switch from synthesizer.
Yeah.
Because if you have an English text read by a Dutch synthesizer, it becomes very funny and difficult to understand. And the same is true if you have an English text with a Dutch synthesizer. It sounds very strangely.
I can imagine it'd be very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that leads us into one of the things I wanted to ask you, which is you were not really doing much programming per se. You were doing systems administrations and a lot of teaching and managing things behind the scenes at Oracle. What led you into learning Python and programming?
You're absolutely right. I've never been a programmer. And for me, there's a big difference between writing a script. And a script for me is maybe up to a couple of hundred lines of code.
Okay.
And it's mostly straightforward, just one flow, maybe one or two functions, but not too many. And it's small and you write it for your own and you maintain it. And that's something completely different, in my opinion, from being a programmer working on a somewhat more complex application.
Yeah. As a system admin, you were doing a lot of that then? Writing some scripts?
Yeah, I tried to automate as many things as I could.
Yeah.
So I hate doing repeated work. So if you have to do it 2 or 3 times, it's about time that you automate things.
Yeah.
And in my current role, of course, also Oracle is doing a lot of business in the cloud world. So our own development environments are all in the cloud.
Okay.
And you have to change your procedures in order to do, for example, if you need to fire up a new machine or a new database or something, you can do it in a GUI console. But of course, you do want to automate things. And there's a very nice Python software development kit for it.
Good.
So you can talk to the cloud infrastructure. So I had to write some things for automating stuff in our cloud.
Okay.
For our own department. And I heard about Python. I never looked at it.
Okay.
So to say. So I just thought, oh, let's see if that's something that I like. And well, I had to get used a little bit to the way that you write Python.
Yeah.
Because I did things in C and Perl, where you have all these curly braces and semicolons and dollars in front of variables and stuff like that.
Yeah, very much so.
And somehow Python, it doesn't have all the clutter, so to say. So it fits better in my brain.
Okay.
So I immediately liked the language and the clean out of the code. And keep in mind that if you're blind, you can't oversee your code. So you have maybe one line of code and the screen reader will announce it to you, or you can read it with your fingers, but your focus is only just one line. So somehow you have to keep the whole code, or at least the routine or the piece of code that you're working on, in your mind. And that is something that is quite difficult, and it takes time in order to get used to this way of working. But so far, so good.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. Like, I wonder about, I mean, this is kind of a nitty gritty thing, but kind of related to what you're saying of white space. A screen reader isn't necessarily going to announce the tabs and the spaces and things like that? Or is that something that you can tell that, oh, this is indented here?
Yeah, there is, JAWS has over a zillion settings.
Okay.
And one of the settings is for, because it has its own scripting language, and there's a scripting tool. And there is a setting where it announces the number of spaces
Okay.
at the left. So if you then move your cursor one line up or down, it says 4 spaces for thing in something, and then you arrow down, it says 8 spaces.
Okay.
But it's a lot of information to consume. And if you have a Braille display, then it's much, with your right hand, you can arrow up or down, and then with your left fingers, you have it on the Braille display, and you can feel that the code is indenting a bit more or a bit less. So
interesting.
having a Braille display is absolutely a pro if you want to do some more serious development work.
So that physically on your desk, it sits below your keyboard, or where does the Braille display, where do you have that set up? I guess you could adjust it depending on your preference.
Yeah. The normal setup is that for my body, there's the Braille display, then the keyboard, and then the laptop. And the screen reader is mostly driven by the numeric keypad.
Okay.
So I have a very strong preference for a full-size keyboard.
Yeah.
And normally my laptop is laying somewhere close on my desk, and I plug in.
Yeah, talk about headless, right?
Yeah. So I plug in my full-size keyboard and my Braille display, and I never have to look at the screen.
How large is a Braille display? Like, how big is that?
It depends. One Braille is 8 dots.
Okay.
And a Braille display is either 20, 40, or 80 cells. And I think, what is maybe an 80 cell Braille display is between 50 and 60 centimeters. It's slightly wider than a full-size keyboard.
Okay. Does that make sense? Do you have one that size? Because I would think for programming, 80 column is pretty common.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as how you'd want to format for yourself specifically.
Yeah, 80 is something that fits nicely in my brain. I started using computers when you had no personal computers or laptops or tablets or stuff like that. So I grew up with a VT100.
Okay.
So
a terminal.
Very old people know. Yeah, just a dumb terminal. And it had either 80 or 132 characters, but 80 is still for me the default size for the terminal emulator.
Okay, yeah.
And it's nice for Python because in PEP8 it says a line should never be longer than 76 or something. And
here's another reason.
Nice. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned this idea of like having scripts and working in this admin environment and firing off things. And then this idea of like, well, I want to move into actually programming and writing complete applications. When was that switch for you?
Yeah, it happened maybe 2-3 years ago.
Okay.
So I did a little bit of scripting in Python, also a little bit at home for some home automation. But I really discovered that it was about time to learn programming, because the projects that I'm working on tend to grow, and I need to do this with my colleagues. So it was about time that I needed to get up to speed in real programming instead of writing an easy script. So I attended a Python course, which wasn't a great success.
Oh, okay.
Because we ran into some accessibility issues. So I started to do some own research, and I was some Googling around, and then I joined this site. You probably have heard of Real Python.
What?
And and because I think I was researching things for the REPL.
Okay.
And I wanted to know a bit more, so I found an article on Real Python about the REPL.
Yeah.
And it was quite a long article, and I was reading, and well, how far am I? And
just kept going.
Yeah, it was about 50%, and I learned a lot, and there's still 50% to go. So it learned me a lot about the REPL. So I like this thing. And then the site was pretty good accessible. And there were some videos, and there was this video player, which was a little bit difficult to navigate because the video player was in a frame and it has buttons and
not accessible.
If I was inside the frame, I could move around. I could find the buttons and could do the pause and play. But if I wanted to read at the same time the transcript to maybe look up a word or something, then you want to pause the video player, but I had to do a lot of moving around to find the pause button and then move back to the transcript to do some spelling. I said, this isn't a very pleasant experience.
Yeah.
So I sent a message to info@RealPython, and I got a really nice reply from Dan Bader.
Yeah, there you go.
And say, how in the world are you using our site with your eyes closed? And I said, well, there's a thing called a screen reader. And I was just wondering, can we maybe add a hotkey to make it easy to start and stop the video player?
Yeah.
And they said, but if you're interested, I can give you a screen reader 101 so that you know how blind people use a computer in the first place. And then maybe we can have a look at RealPython. And he gladly accepted.
Yeah. It's kind of the same tour you gave me in a way.
Yeah. So within a couple of days, there was this Control-Shift-P hotkey, so I could start and play the video, which was really nice. And in the session with Dan, he said, are you using the search thing? I said, no. Should I? I said, well, it's very convenient. And I said, okay, let me give it a try. And I moved to the search field and I entered the search term, I think dictionary or something.
Yeah.
And he said, did you notice that there is a counter that's telling you how many hits you have? I said, no. And he said, this is a poor experience.
It's not sharing that stuff with you. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a search counter, but it wasn't picked up by the screen reader. So we made that accessible. So if I now search something and it says, well, I have 589 search results, and then you have all these checkboxes where you can narrow things down. I want a video course or an article, and every time you select or deselect something, the counter is announced again. So that was a big improvement for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool to have a feedback loop like that. I mean, I'm guessing for both sides, you know?
Yeah. It's something that I really want to use, and it's not accessible. I try to get in contact with the developers, and 9 out of 10, you send an email and you never hear something back. And with RealPython, within a couple of days, we started to improving things. So that was a very warm welcome for RealPython.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, kind of taking a step back, you had been using the screen reader technology for a while, and I would guess across how the web has changed, over the years. And one question would be, how long did it take you to get comfortable reading web pages and navigating with the screen reader? And then are there things that have been in the way of making it accessible, like new things that have been added to websites that are a bit of frustrating to use?
That's an interesting topic.
Okay.
Generally spoken, HTML is very accessible with a screen reader.
Yeah.
If it's been written correctly.
Okay.
I will ask you to put a link in the show notes. There is an organization that's performing every 2 years a survey amongst screen reader users on how they're using their screen reader on the web.
All right.
And the nice thing is that it can teach you as a developer how we are using your website.
Yeah.
And
okay.
The most common way, how we navigate a web page is by moving by heading. So in the web world for a screen reader, there's something known as quick navigation, and you can quickly navigate to HTML elements. So the H is from heading, and every time you press the letter H, you will move to the next heading. Or if you do Shift, you go back, and if you do the B, you jump from button to button, and the E from edit field, and the X for checkbox and stuff like that.
Interesting.
But then it must be coded correctly to use the correct HTML element. And sometimes people visually with cascading style sheets, they shape something that it looks like a heading. So visually, it's pretty clear that it is a heading, but they stuff it into a paragraph. And then for
the
me,
P tag instead of an H tag or whatever. Okay.
it isn't a heading. And the same is, so I can't find it. And on real Python, everything is nicely divided with headings, which makes it easy to navigate.
Okay.
So that is a big thing, that if you use the correct HTML elements, it is probably pretty good accessible. But if you make a graphic that looks like a button, but it isn't an HTML button, for me, it isn't a button.
Yeah. Okay.
And the same is, for example, if you program an input field, an edit field, you can associate a label to that edit field. So I know what the purpose of the edit field is. But sometimes people visually put on the left side first name, colon, and then an edit field, but it's not an attribute of the edit field itself. And then for me, it's just an edit field, and I have no idea what I need to put in. Stuff that is difficult is if you move around things every time we visit the same website.
Yeah, sure.
Because I have to reinvent where everything is. Or if things are changing dynamically without telling the screen reader.
That's a new thing that I think happens a lot. I don't know if you often go to, say, Apple or something like that, where they're trying so hard to make it pretty and make it sort of animated in a way. And I can imagine that would be very off-putting potentially, because you're not experiencing that. You're experiencing this kind of weird shifting movement. I don't know if that's truly how it happens.
Yeah. Sometimes people use tables as a layout thing.
Yeah.
And then it becomes difficult, or they smash things in a table without proper table elements.
Is that more common now? I feel like that was an old hack to try to do layout stuff, was using a table.
Yeah, it's becoming less of a problem.
Okay, good.
Sometimes you want to, for example, the search counter is something that will be updated by some JavaScript or something.
Okay.
And these are now known as rich internet application, and there's a standard. And by the way, all the standards are can be found at the W3C, and there's the Web Content Accessibility Guide, which can teach. We could put a link in the show notes.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll include the user survey that you shared with me, and then that one also, the content accessibility guidelines. I think that'll be really good for people to at least kind of peruse, get an idea what's happening.
Yeah. And there is a standard known as ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Applications.
Yeah.
And there is a relatively new thing where if you change the content, for example, the search counter, then it can tell the screen reader, well, this thing has changed, and it will send an event to the screen reader, so the screen reader can announce the changed value. But you have to program this carefully. Sometimes, for example, there is an edit field and you have only, let's say, 100 characters space for your comment.
Yeah.
And they put in a counter how many spaces left, and they announce it very frequently. So if I put in one letter, it says 99, and I put in another letter, it says 98. So every time you hit the keyboard, you get 97, 96, 95, 94. And
that's pretty noisy for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's just Alt F4, close the website, because no way you can enter something without typos. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few things there that people should think about and keep in mind, and then some resources that they can use there, because that's a very common thing that, people want to do, is they want to build applications for others to use with Python, and including this accessibility. And the web is, if anything, becoming easier as a distribution place for Python. I don't know if you've played at all with the newest tech on that, the PyScript. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I've heard about it, and I haven't got the time to take a look at it.
Okay. Yeah, but it's interesting, like the idea of like literally writing Python in a browser kind of thing is very interesting. I guess kind of we go back a little bit. We were talking about this idea of writing applications. What do you think is sort of different there that you felt like you needed to learn, this moving from scripts to writing applications, and if there were like particular challenges in the sense, I know you mentioned this idea of keeping all of it in your head as you're creating it. Were there other sort of challenges to that?
Yeah, well, so far in my career, everything that I developed was basically just one big, gigantic file.
Yeah.
And if it's only a couple of hundred files, then that isn't a problem. But it makes reusing code more difficult because you need to copy and paste thing, and then it becomes a nightmare to maintain it. So having something in one file, let's say 300 lines, and you want to split it up in maybe some more manageable pieces to improve your code reusability.
Sure.
Yeah, that's something that I find very difficult.
Okay.
And what do I put where? And also for a script, doesn't matter how you name things, but if you want to reuse it, suddenly thinking about variable names becomes pretty important, and and functions names and interfaces and return values and stuff like that. And those skills is something that I need to learn. And there's lots of material that I put into the category learning a language.
Yeah.
But there is very little in learning how to program.
Yeah, true. Yeah, the techniques of learning how to truly write complete programs that, and also in a way that if anyone else is going to use this thing or use your code, all these things that you kind of need to keep in mind, because very often, like you're just saying, you're the one who's using it later. And the ability for you to understand what the variable name was going to be and going beyond giving it like a letter and a number or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. A1, A2.
Right. I mean, it's, it's the way people do file names often, right? It's like, new one or whatever, or commit messages or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty common struggle, but very important in the sense that it's so much to do with usability, especially if you're going to modularize things. You're going to import things and then reuse the code.
Yeah, and I discovered that I have a certain fear because I write something and then it works.
Okay.
And then my colleague says, well, maybe you need to move this around here, and maybe you need to split this into two functions, and maybe you need to separate this out in a separate file. And then I become very, very scared. Well, but it's working now. And if I need to change it, I will break everything. And
yeah, exactly.
So the whole concept of refactoring code is something that I never did.
Yeah.
But I now begin to understand, yes, it is important. And
how's that going?
Up and down.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. But I'm learning, and I got some guidance from more experienced developers, so that's nice.
Yeah.
But also, if you think about object-oriented and what objects do you create and how do you do this with methods and inheritance and all the interesting stuff. And when I started to program or writing scripts, there was no such things as object-oriented and stuff like that. In Shell, it doesn't exist. And in Perl, they started in Perl version 3 and 4. And in version 5, they added something, made it look like a little bit object-oriented, but it isn't fully object-oriented as the way in Python, because in Python, everything is an object.
Yeah. I got to play my little sound effect that Christopher's been introducing lately.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about how far down the rabbit hole the language itself goes, and you don't have to know that when you start, but pretty quickly this idea of the dots and methods
Hmm.
and the idea of these sort of parameters and so forth, like it starts to unveil itself and you're like, oh, this is why I should at least know kind of what's happening with it if I'm not necessarily going to be, hardcore object oriented code. At least I can understand what Python's doing with it.
Yeah, and I now begin to discover why object-oriented makes it so easily to reuse pieces of code. But if you want to reuse it, you have to think about your interface and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I have the impression that I'm getting my brain around it
Good.
lately. So that's good. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course, and it's connected to our discussion this week. One of the best distribution methods for your Python applications is to build it for the web. And this course is designed to get you up to speed with web terminology and techniques if you aren't familiar. It's titled HTML and CSS Foundations for Python Developers. The course is based on a Real Python tutorial by previous guest, Philip Axeni, and it's presented by Alexandra Davis. And she'll show you how to structure a basic HTML file, view and inspect HTML in your browser, insert images and page links, learn how to style a website with CSS, and how to format the HTML with accessibility in mind. If you're interested in web development with Python, then knowing HTML and CSS will help you understand web frameworks like Django and Flask even better. Real Python video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and where needed, include code examples for the techniques shown. All lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the enhanced search tool on realpython.com. I was wondering about that idea of refactoring. I feel like would be very interesting in a screen reader world, the way that how often, I don't want to call it a change log, but like, how the changes might appear, how they sometimes will have like a red line would be like an indicator in some cases, or a particular line. This line number was changed or things like that. I don't know if that's something that you're experiencing with the tools that you're using.
Well, first of all, I'm old, so I grew up in the Unix world, and for me, there's only one editor, and it's VI.
VI, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's VI everywhere, and I tried to play with some of the integrated development environments, but
Yeah.
they're either not accessible or it's a completely new world that I have to learn, and it's diverting me from the task of learning Python. So I'm still doing everything on the command line on Unix in VI.
Okay.
And I do use Git and Git diff and stuff like that, or I just use the plain Unix diff command. And that's something that I understand.
Okay. So you're comfortable with maybe the smaller changes you were making in things like scripts, back in the day. And now as you look at these sort of larger movements in your code and having to keep them in your head and so forth, it's just like sort of growing the problem somewhat and the space,
Yeah. And as long as I move stuff myself from file to file, then I know where it is. And if I don't know where it is, grep is my friend. And
okay, good. Yeah.
I use Unix to find where is this thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the old school tools work great for this environment.
Yeah. Everything on the command line.
Yeah, I was thinking that like literally the Visual Studio Code is not going to be, a direction necessarily you're heading in this way. Yeah.
No, for two reasons: that I'm not sure if it's very accessible.
Yeah.
And also my brain is a Unix brain, and I do use Windows.
Sure.
For my front end, so my email, my web browsing, my presentations, my spreadsheet, all the desktop productivity tools.
Okay.
But if I have to work on the Windows command line and say, why are these slashes the other way around? And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
I can't get used to programming directly on Windows.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because you're kind of coming from Unix.
Because I need to know where my stuff is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you using
yeah.
the Linux subsystem thing at all?
No.
No. Okay. What is your command line tools that you're using?
Well, I use Secure CRT as the SSH terminal emulator on Windows.
Okay.
And it's very accessible. And at home, I have a bunch of Raspberry Pis running Linux. And
you shell into them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And have lots of tabs in my terminal emulator if I need to work on many things at the same time.
So the Raspberry Pi is doing sort of helpful accessibility things in your home then?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit. In the Netherlands, you have your utility thing in your house.
Okay, like a meter of sorts?
Yeah. And it has a P1 port, and it can spit out JSON every so many seconds.
Okay.
And there's a Pi with some appliance that I found on the internet. It's called P1 Monitor, I believe. And it's receiving the JSON data and processing it and put it into a MySQL or an SQLite database.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
And it has a web interface. It's completely inaccessible, but you can send REST calls to it, and you get JSON back. And I process the JSON on another Raspberry Pi in Python, and I spit out a nicely formatted HTML table with our daily power and gas consumption.
Okay. You know where you're at.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
And
so you're running, are those in Python then, or things that you've kind of worked out?
Yeah, everything that I developed for the last couple of years is in Python.
Nice.
So I can't even read my Perl stuff anymore.
Okay.
What was this?
Yeah, exactly.
What was I thinking?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was wondering about, I think I mentioned this in our first talk together, was there are these Python graphical user interface libraries and that are kind of not web-based per se. And I wonder if you've explored those or you have had any experience playing around with them and how they could be more accessible or less accessible.
Well, in order to bring in a bit more structure in my learning journey,
sure,
I did the Real Python Basics book.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And that learning path, right?
Yeah. And I did everything locally on a Pi. But then there is this chapter on GUIs.
Yeah, the TK enter stuff.
Yeah, the TK enter. And I tried to do this just on the REPL a little bit to see if it was accessible. And there's this one of the first examples where you put in a box and maybe a button to click it, and the whole thing was completely not accessible.
Okay. It was just like another program running off in the distance. You just had to close it, probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not into GUIs most of the time.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I do a lot of things on the command line, and I really like the ArcParse module.
Yeah. Okay.
In the standard library.
Yeah.
And I use it for everything I write almost. So
okay.
So that's nice. No, I gave up on using integrated development environments and trying to write GUI programs myself on Windows.
Sure.
I'm not sure if it's just out of the box, not accessible, and there are things, methods, or attributes you have to set to make it accessible.
Yeah.
But the first contact wasn't pleasant.
Not promising. Yeah.
No.
I would think that maybe the web frameworks would be maybe a direction, though they are kind of their own beast. You end up like learning a lot about just how they're organized and so forth. You know, something like Django is like a project in and of itself.
Yeah. Dan told me that real Python is all written in Django.
It is, yeah.
And it's very accessible, so that looks promising.
Yeah.
And for the stuff that I just mentioned about my daily power and gas consumption, I did it all. I spit out the HTML myself
Okay.
to make it accessible. But because I wasn't aware of any module that could do this for me, but I'm thinking about maybe trying to going to explore a little bit of Django to see that makes things more easy for me, and maybe build some website or so internally in the house. Do you ever play with it?
Yeah, it's very mature. We were just talking about it earlier. I had a recording session with Christopher earlier, and we were talking about the developer survey they have for Django, and I was just mentioning just like it's becoming such a mature product. I don't know if you know its origin, but it kind of comes from people that were building sort of news sites, and tools like that. And so they wanted to be able to create a content management system that people could access and put in things. And, definitely that's what real Python is.
Yeah.
That's how I put this particular episode of the show will be, something I enter in there, and I enter in all the different values for, the stuff I create.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in some ways that since it's very web centric and it kind of comes from that background, that there's that ARIA and other things that kind of are related. And I think there are people that are keeping that in sight as they continue to develop it. So I don't know, I hope that would be a good experience for you. And I think that something like Flask, which is much more modular, literally micro framework kind of stuff, would be probably a little harder to tie things together as opposed to having something that is, kind of a complete solution. And, you don't have to use everything that comes in the box, but there's definitely a lot there with Django.
Yeah. And I know these high quality websites with lots of tutorials and good stuff. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Everything I learn about Python is from real Python, and it's amazing how much material there is and the quality.
Yeah.
It's absolutely worth every penny.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about, you shared a couple resources with me. Maybe we could talk a little bit about maybe JAWS itself. I'm guessing there's been a history of screen readers out there. What's been your experience, and how did you land with this particular tool?
Well, the screen readers started to develop already in the Microsoft DOS timeframe.
Okay.
And there were a couple. JAWS was one of them. But I was still fully sighted, so
yeah,
it was completely not part of my daily life.
Sure.
And then in the early 90s, Windows became a thing, Windows 3.11 and especially Windows 95. So all the screen reader manufacturers needed to get their product working on Windows. So there was maybe the screen reader war time frame.
Okay, sure.
Somehow the manufacturer of JAWS did a pretty good job. So they became very, very successful and somehow the dominant company to provide screen readers.
Okay.
And I had blind students long time ago, and they were using JAWS. So I knew that something existed that was called JAWS. And by the time I needed a screen reader about 24 years ago now, I said, well, let me try to see this JAWS thing, and everybody can download it, and then you can have a 40-minute demo, and then if you do a reboot, you have another 40 minutes.
Okay.
Because it's a licensed product.
Yeah.
And so I acquired a license and I started to using it, and I really liked it. And what was very strong for me is that they have a basic training.
Okay.
Very extensive basic training that is part of the product that teaches you how to use the screen reader, because it's, you can probably imagine, a complete new world to drive a Windows machine using only the keyboard. And Windows has a pretty good user interface from a screen reader perspective.
Okay. It's consistent, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I'm using JAWS, and they also were very quickly in making Microsoft Office fully accessible. And for me as an instructor, that was very important.
Yeah. You need those tools.
Yeah, PowerPoint, for example, was very important for me, and Word and Outlook, and
Yeah.
lesser amount Excel.
Okay.
But there are other screen readers. There is something from Australia, which is called NVDA, Non-Visual Desktop Access,
Okay.
and it's written in Python.
Oh, interesting.
So that's interesting, and that's a completely open source, freely available solution.
Okay.
But I was already using JAWS for more than 5 years when NVDA came around, and
Have to do a whole training session to get back
yeah,
your legs under
yeah,
you for that. Yeah.
yeah. And of course, lately for more than 10 years, you have VoiceOver on the Macintosh and
Yeah.
on your iPhone and iPad, which is also a nice product. I use an iPhone and an Apple Watch, and so everything is mostly Apple except my laptop.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what you do the programming on, and
Yeah,
and
everything.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the voiceover works pretty well for what you need it for, but it's mostly not necessarily work. It's more kind of play and trying out other stuff.
Yeah, and I think 7 or 8 years ago, I took a week off to use a Macintosh to figure out because an Apple Macintosh is running Unix.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's very appealing to me. But VoiceOver doesn't work as good as JAWS does.
okay,
And by the time Office wasn't accessible, and no matter what I did, I couldn't be as productive on the Macintosh using VoiceOver compared to being productive on a Windows laptop with JAWS. So I stick with JAWS, and that working perfectly fine.
okay, good.
Yeah, there's another nice resource probably for the audience that's called Surf's Up, Surfing the Internet with JAWS.
Okay,
And it's basically a collection of web pages where we as blind people can learn how to use a screen reader
okay.
to find our way on the web.
I was thinking it's like I don't want to make light of it, but is it like it's sort of an obstacle course? Like you learn how to practice to get around it and so forth?
No, but everything that you need to know is it's basically a small website.
Yeah.
And everything you need to learn. And it's a very, from beginners to intermediate to advanced topics.
Okay, good.
And if you are a developer and you wonder, well, how do I make, for example, tables accessible? You can have a look at something that is definitely accessible in these pages.
Nice.
And I think Dan peeked around a little bit to figure out how they did some things in the search up that he could use for the Real Python website.
Okay, to help with like the video stuff and things like that. Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah. So that's a nice resource as well.
Good. So I have these questions, and I wanted to, ask you kind of a bonus one. Normally I ask, what are you excited about in the world of Python? And I do want to ask you that too, but I wanted to start with, what are you excited about in the world of screen reading and assistive tech? What's new on the horizon there that you're excited about?
Yeah, the big thing in screen reader world is AI.
Okay.
And what has been a big problem for us is graphical stuff.
Sure.
And in JAWS, there was something put into the product a couple of years ago called Picture Smart. So if you had a picture, you can send it up to the cloud and it will return a very brief description. Well, it's three people standing in front of a building type of information you get back.
Okay.
And in the March release, they do every 6 weeks a new release. And in the newest release, there's now Picture Smart AI, where you can take a graphic or a screenshot or an HTML element, for example, and you can send it to the cloud. And by default, it will go to Google Gemini, and then their AI will take a look and come back with a very descriptive description of what you sent them.
Nice.
And you can also send it to ChatGPT.
Okay.
And if you send, for example, a family photo, it says, well, there are two people on the photo, and the man is wearing a black suit, and it's about an orange tie, and it has long hair, and he's wearing glasses, and she is wearing a nice dress, and it looks like this is a happy photo. Maybe it's a celebration or something. So it gives you a very, very good description.
Nice.
And also, for example, I did test with some pie chart that I found on the web. And it says, well, this is about how people like their fruit. And it has 5 pies. And the biggest one is yellow, and it's for melon. And the next, and it has 37%. And there's another one for bananas, and it's green, and it has 12%. And so it's basically describing the whole graphic.
Okay.
And that is a big, big breakthrough.
Nice.
Because things that weren't completely accessible are now fully accessible for the blind. That is a big thing.
Yeah.
That's a big improvement.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you have the context of working with those types of things in your past. And so, like, I wonder sometimes somebody who is blind from birth, if that would be slightly different to sort of experience and hear these things being described now. I wonder about using a tool like that if people need some help in what it's like to write descriptive text. I'm guessing there's other tools, also resources there for people who have never done that.
Yeah, it is a very nice development.
Yeah.
But having a website app, for example, if there's a picture on the website, it's far quicker if the developer puts in an alt text, so I can read the alt text directly on the website instead of going to my screen reader, focus on the picture or the graphic, and send it off to the cloud and wait 5 seconds for the answer. So,
yeah, much faster.
Yeah.
Okay, that's neat.
But it's a breakthrough.
Yeah. So, what are you excited about that's happening in the world of Python?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can mention the R word, but I'm also a bit into security, and I know that a lot of security problems are caused by memory problems.
Sure.
So in the Christmas break, I took a look at Rust.
Yeah, okay.
Because I was just interested in how the stuff works.
Yeah.
And I understand now how it works. And I think it's a nice language for low-level stuff, but for me, is Python still the thing to go? Within Python, I am trying to keep up with the latest development, and I'm very interested to see what the next release will bring.
Yeah.
And for my work, I always been very interested in internals. So I did some internals already, or reading about the internals in Python. And of course, you come across the thing for the global interpreter lock and how it makes scaling up things in parallel difficult. And in Python 3.13, there's a compiler option where you can say, well, we are going to implement things differently without the GIL. So I'm very interested to see how they will work out and what new developments that will make available for us in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll be hearing a lot over the spring and into the summer as things get locked, feature locked. Yeah.
So I wanted to learn also more about the internals of Python. That's for later, but that's something that I always found very interesting to look under the hood, so to say.
Yeah, you can work on some of those C skills you had developed.
Yeah.
I guess this might be related to that. Then, what's something that you want to learn next? It doesn't have to be programming. It could be, anything that you're interested in learning.
Well, there's a piano in the home.
Oh, okay.
So, but I'm so busy doing Python in my normal work. And
sure.
So when time permits, I'm thinking about learning how to play the piano.
Would there be assistive tech there to help you, or is it something you would kind of work out, or do you have a musical background already?
No, I have no musical background whatsoever, so
Okay.
it's going to be interesting, and I have no idea, but there must be a way.
Yeah. Okay.
How you can play the piano without looking at music on paper and finding your way around on the keyboard. But that's something in the back of my mind for the future.
That sounds good. Well, Audrey, thanks so much for coming on the show and actually for suggesting us doing an episode about this.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. It has been a real pleasure doing this interview.
All right, thanks. I want to thank Audrey van Breederode for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.